The pearl white SUV drove straight through my private road sign, snapping it in half like a dry branch. And the woman who stepped out afterwards smiled as if she had just done something perfectly legal. It's always been community access. Her voice carried across the North Carolina hillside morning, dry and sharp like freshly printed paper. In her hand was a glossy map, the edges still stiff. Behind her, 3 men in polo shirts embroidered with the Cedar Ridge Preserve HOA logo stood with their arms crossed, looking at me as if I were the trespasser. I looked down at the broken wooden sign at my feet. For 18 years, I had maintained this dirt road myself. I leveled it after every rainstorm, poured fresh gravel each winter. This road was not a shortcut. It was the only entrance leading up to the log cabin on the hillside where I had lived since my wife passed away. Easement from 1968, she added, lifting the map slightly higher, as if sunlight could make it look more legitimate. I did not respond. I just looked at the map, at the boundary lines drawn in dark blue ink, at the symbols that were far too new for a document supposedly more than half a century old. I had worked as a bridge and highway engineer for the State Department of Transportation for over 35 years. I had read thousands of technical drawings, surveyed every inch of land before placing a single bridge pillar into a river. I knew what old ink looked like. I knew 70s typefaces did not look like this, but they did not know that. To them, I was just a 62-year-old man living alone on a piece of land sitting outside the edge of their new development. To them, I was easy to intimidate. Linda Harrow stepped forward, her high heels pressing lightly into the gravel. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice sweet but not warm, "our HOA has documented access rights according to the records. This road has always served the community." The community. I looked past her. The newly built tiled roof houses of Cedar Ridge Preserve lined the opposite hillside. 3 years ago, that land had been pasture. When I bought these 14 acres in the year 2004, the area held nothing but wind and wild grass. I bought this land for one simple reason. No HOA. No one telling me what color to paint my fence. No letters threatening fines because I left my old pickup in the yard. I had spent my entire life working within codes and regulations. When I retired, I wanted quiet. But quiet seems to bother certain people. "We have official documentation," Linda continued, pushing the map closer toward me. "If you continue blocking access, the board will be forced to take legal action." One of the 3 men behind her shook his head slightly, as if he pitied me. I felt heat rise slowly in my chest, not an explosive anger, but the deep, contained kind that builds over time. I bent down and picked up half of the broken private road sign. The wood was still damp from last night's rain. "Where can I see the original 1968 filing?" I asked calmly. Linda paused for half a second. Then she smiled. "We already have a copy, as you can see." "A copy?" I nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I should review the original at the county office myself." One of the men behind her shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. Linda pressed her lips together. "There's no need for that. The HOA attorney has confirmed it." The HOA attorney. I had worked with attorneys my entire life on bridge and roadway projects worth millions of dollars. I knew one thing for certain. Paperwork does not lie. People do. I straightened up, standing slightly taller than her. Not because I wanted to intimidate her, but because I refused to be looked down on. "I'll verify it," I said. Short, clear, no argument. Linda studied my face, trying to read what I was thinking. Maybe she expected me to lose my temper, to shout, to say something that could be recorded and used against me in some future HOA meeting. But I did not give her that. Their SUV turned around, tires grinding over gravel once more before disappearing down the slope. I remained standing alone on my road. Wind moved through the old pine trees. The scent of damp earth and resin filled the air. At the top of the hill, my log cabin looked down quietly. They thought I was just an old man living outside the subdivision. They did not know I had spent my entire career reading what others overlooked. They did not know I had kept every tax record since the day I bought this land, neatly filed in a metal cabinet in my office. And they certainly did not know that tomorrow morning, when the county archives opened, I would be sitting in front of an old microfilm machine, scrolling back through the frames from the 1960s. If there was an easement, I would see it. And if there was not, then a freshly printed map would not save anyone. The quiet I had bought with 18 years of labor would not be taken that easily. Not by a Karen holding a copy. And certainly not by a board that thought it could rewrite history with new ink. The private road sign disappeared after just 2 days. Not blown away by the wind, not rotted through by rain. It had been ripped out of the ground and tossed into the ditch like a warning. I picked it up at 6 in the morning, when frost still whitened the grass. The nails were bent. The wood was crushed underfoot. Not an accident. Intentional. Cedar Ridge Preserve had begun using my road as if it had never belonged to anyone. That afternoon, 3 pickup trucks rolled through in a line along the dirt path, laughing loudly. One man leaned his head out the window and whistled when he saw me standing on my porch. His eyes were not hostile, just the confidence of someone who believed he had permission. Permission. I stood there holding a cup of coffee that was slowly turning cold. I did not shout. I did not raise a hand to stop them. I simply watched their tires grind over the gravel I had poured just a week earlier. 18 years ago, when I signed the contract to buy this land, the attorney asked me a question. Are you sure you do not want to buy inside a development? I answered immediately. No. I had lived more than half my life under regulations. Every bridge and highway project I managed went through dozens of approval rounds. Every inch of concrete had to meet code. I understood the law, and I understood the value of freedom when you no longer have to live under someone else's rules. Cedar Ridge did not exist the year I moved here. There was only forest and a small creek behind the hill. 3 years ago, when the bulldozers arrived, I knew my quiet was about to be tested. But I did not expect them to go this far. That evening, I drove through the new development. Yellow streetlights washed over rows of identical rooftops. Lawns were trimmed straight as ruler lines. A large sign at the entrance read, Cedar Ridge Preserve, a premier HOA community. Wah! I knew that word could turn a neighborhood into a place of order. Or into a battlefield. I pulled over and looked up toward the hill behind it. My dirt road curved down from there to the main road, cutting 8 minutes off the longer route around the highway. 8 minutes, to someone in a hurry, can feel like a real advantage. I understood why they wanted it, but wanting does not equal having the right. The next morning, I put the sign back up. This time I used a steel post driven deeper into the ground. I added a small metal plate that clearly read private property, no easement recorded. By afternoon, Linda appeared. She stepped out of her SUV, sunglasses covering half her face. You are misleading our residents, she said, her voice colder than the day before. Our residents. I looked at her. There was irritation in her eyes, but deeper than that, concern. She needed this road. I could see it. I am stating exactly what the records say, I replied. She gave a thin smile. Your records? No, I said slowly. County records. She fell silent for a beat. Then she turned away, leaving behind the heavy scent of perfume and the sharp sound of her heels pressing into gravel. That night, I sat in my study. The gray metal filing cabinet stood beside my desk. I opened the top drawer. Inside were tax folders lined up neatly by year. 2004, 2005, all the way to last year. Every year, I paid property taxes on the full parcel. Not a single entry listed shared access. Not one line mentioned right-of-way. I flipped through each page, hearing the dry rustle like time whispering. I was not in a hurry. People like Linda are used to things happening fast. They send emails. They print maps. They vote in air-conditioned meeting rooms. I am used to the slow process of real paperwork. Outside, another vehicle drove through. I heard the gravel crunch. This time I stepped onto the porch, said nothing, just watched. The driver avoided my eyes. They thought I was just a stubborn old man clinging to his land. They did not know I once led a highway expansion project worth tens of millions of dollars. They did not know I had stood before state boards, facing attorneys and investors, defending every meter of public land from improper claims. I do not enjoy conflict. But I never step back when the records stand on my side. Tomorrow morning, I will go to the county archives. I will request the full subdivision filings from the 60s to the 70s. I will sit at the microfilm machine, scrolling through each black and white frame. If they claim there was an easement recorded in 1968, it must be there. And if it is not, then someone printed a new story. And I have never allowed a false story to become truth simply because it was repeated enough times. Night settled slowly. I closed the filing cabinet, the metal click echoing softly in the quiet room. They have a board. They have votes. They have meetings filled with loud voices. I have paperwork. And sometimes, in battles between noise and truth, the quiet side is the most dangerous one of all. The letter arrived on Tuesday afternoon, stamped with the official seal of the Cedar Ridge Preserve HOA, like a small summons slipping through the door slot. They were no longer pretending to be friendly. I opened the envelope right there at the kitchen table. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, a notice of violation, a demand to remove the warning sign, and a color-printed map, this time carefully laminated, as if glossy plastic could turn it into the truth. Bold across the center of the page were the words, Historical Easement, Established 1968. I set the paper down, looked at it a little longer, and then I smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile a man gives when he spots the first crack in a wall built too quickly. The font was too modern, the lines too sharp, and in the lower right corner was a drawing code that the State Department of Transportation only began using after 1992. I had been part of that transition. They did not know that. In their eyes, I was just the old man on the hill. But I was the one who used to sign off on official map sets before they were entered into state records. I took a magnifying glass from the drawer. Late afternoon light slanted through the window, reflecting off the glossy plastic. I tilted the page, studying every small detail. One boundary line had been redrawn, the ink darker than the rest, as if it had been added later. I felt my heartbeat slow, deep and steady. Outside, another engine passed. A different SUV drove by, slower than usual. The driver glanced at my house as if calculating how much longer it would take before this road officially belonged to them. In his mind, I was probably the last obstacle. In Linda's mind, I was likely just a stubborn man who did not understand the law. I picked up the letter and read it again. The tone was firm, nearly threatening. If I continued obstructing community access rights, the board would pursue appropriate legal action. Legal action. I had heard that phrase hundreds of times in my career. It was often used like a wooden gavel striking a table, meant to make someone back down. But real legality does not live in words. It lives in records. That night, I installed a small camera facing the dirt entrance. Not to intimidate, but to document. Time, license plates, frequency. I wrote dates in blue ink in an old notebook. A professional abbot. Never rely on memory when paper can preserve the facts. My heartbeat remained slow. My mind clear. I did not need to shout in an HOA meeting. I did not need to argue on the lawn. I needed data. 2 days later, they held an expanded board meeting. I received an email invitation to attend, politely worded in a way that felt artificial. One of the newer neighbors, a man around 55 years old, stopped by my gate that morning. "We just want an easier exit," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's nothing personal." I looked at him. In his eyes was the weariness of someone who had worked his whole life and simply wanted things to be easier. "I understand," I replied, "but your convenience cannot be built on someone else's land." He fell silent. Maybe for the first time, he considered that. The meeting took place in the brightly lit community center. Linda stood at the front, confident, the color map projected large on the screen. She pointed to the drawn line, speaking about history, about collective rights, about community spirit. All eyes turned to me when I walked in. I wore my old jacket and carried no thick binders. Just a thin envelope. Linda smiled. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have anything to add?" I stepped forward, my heartbeat steady, unhurried. "I have only one question," I said, my voice clear in the silent room. On what date was this map officially recorded at the county office? The air shifted. Linda blinked. It is a historical document. A historical document, I repeated. Does it have a filing number? One board member behind her looked down at his papers. The confidence that had filled the room began to fracture. I placed the thin envelope on the table. I requested certified copies of all original filings from 1968 to 1975. There is no recorded easement, and the code in the lower right corner of this map was not adopted until after 1992. The room went silent, briefly. Then whispers rose like wind through pine trees. Linda looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes were no longer certain. Perhaps she thought I would respond with emotion. She did not know I respond with history. I said nothing more. I did not need to. Sometimes, one small detail at the right moment is enough to shake an entire story built in haste. And I have many details. The microfilm machine let out a dry screech as I turned the adjustment knob. The screen blurred white, then suddenly revealed black lines of text from more than half a century ago. If there was an easement in 1968, it had to be here. Not in Linda's hands, not in a glossy laminated printout. Here, in the dusty archives of Red Hollow County. The records room sat in the basement of the old administrative building. The smell of damp paper and aged metal blended together, heavy but familiar. Fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead, giving the sense that time did not move as quickly down here as it did outside. The clerk, a woman around 30 years old, looked slightly surprised when I requested all subdivision filings for the western sector from 1965 to 1975. Are you researching history? She asked. I'm verifying a claim, I replied. She nodded and did not ask more, but I saw the curiosity in her eyes as she brought out small black reels labeled by year. I sat down at the microfilm machine, back straight, hands resting on the table the way they used to in my Department of Transportation office. The familiar feeling returned. I was no longer the old man dismissed in an HOA meeting. I was the engineer who once checked every millimeter of deviation on bridge blueprints. I turned the knob. 1965. Nothing. 1966. A transfer of agricultural land. 1967. A subdivision south of the creek. My heart beat evenly, slowly, no rush. I was used to flipping through hundreds of pages just to find one small line. Then the screen blurred again and shifted to 1968. I leaned closer. The text sharpened. Private agricultural access. Non-transferable. Restricted to original parcel. I stopped. Not community access. Not public right-of-way. Private. Non-transferable. I magnified the section. The black and white print was still crisp despite being more than half a century old. There was not a single line mentioning any permanent easement for community use. I wrote down the filing number, the page, the recording date. Then I continued scrolling through the following years. 1970, a minor boundary adjustment. 1972, a note regarding partial land use conversion from agriculture. No easement. Not anywhere. I leaned back in the chair. My breath left slowly. Not in surprise. I had sensed it from the beginning, but seeing the truth appear in black ink on white background carried its own weight. The clerk stepped closer. Did you find what you needed? I found what does not exist, I said quietly. She frowned. The claim of a community easement from 1968 is not in the records. She paused, then lowered her voice. If they are using documentation that was never officially recorded, that is a serious issue. I looked at her. I know. I requested a certified copy of the 1968 filing. She pressed a red seal into the corner of the paper, the sound of the stamp firm and decisive. A small sound, but one with legal weight. I held that paper in my hand. It felt nothing like Linda's laminated map. One was new ink and confidence. The other was history. When I stepped out of the administrative building, the afternoon sun cast gold across the stone steps. I paused for a moment, looking down at the quiet small town below the hill. Somewhere in Cedar Ridge, Linda might have been drafting her next email, preparing for another meeting, believing she still controlled the narrative. She did not know the narrative had shifted, not because I had raised my voice, but because I returned to where every real land story begins: the records. I got into my truck and placed the certified copy on the passenger seat, as if transporting a silent witness. They thought I was a lonely man clinging to old land. They did not know I had worked directly with the state prosecutor's office on public land disputes. I understood the process. I understood the consequences when an unrecorded document is used to apply legal pressure. My dirt road curved ahead as I drove home. The late sun stretched long shadows across the gravel. Now I did not just have instinct. I had proof. And in battles between surface-level authority and documented truth, proof is what makes even the most confident people begin to worry. They sent me a demand for reimbursement of legal fees before I had even finished my morning coffee. The bold number printed in the center of the page was enough to make most people hesitate, but I did not look at the amount first. I looked at the title: Demand for Obstruction of Community Easement. I set the letter down on the kitchen table, beside the certified copy from the county office. 2 sheets of paper, 2 different worlds. One was a confident declaration. The other was an official record from 1968. I pulled out a chair and sat down, then opened the gray metal filing cabinet in my study. The tax folders were lined up neatly, their spines yellowed with time. I took out the first one, the year 2004, the year I bought this land. I flipped through each page. Property tax receipts, parcel descriptions. There was no note about shared access, no line mentioning any community right-of-way. I continued pulling the following years: 2005, 2006, all the way to the most recent year. Each year a receipt, each year a county stamp, each year confirming one thing: that I was the sole owner of that road. Outside, a pickup truck drove past, slower than usual. The driver glanced toward my house, his expression uncertain. Rumors had likely begun spreading through Cedar Ridge. Something was no longer as solid as it once seemed. I gathered all the receipts and stacked them neatly. More than 20 years of paying property taxes. If there had been a community easement, the county would have recorded it and adjusted the assessed value long ago, but they never did. That evening, I attended the board meeting at their latest invitation. The room was brightly lit, the air tight as a drawn wire. Linda stood at the front, but this time I noticed something different in her eyes. Not confidence. Worry. I walked in carrying an old leather briefcase. A few people whispered as I passed. They expected me to lose my temper, to slam the table, to raise my voice like the HOA stories people watch online. I did not. Linda spoke first. Mr. Caldwell continues to deny the community its lawful access. The board has consulted legal counsel. I looked at her. Whose counsel? She hesitated slightly. The HOA's. I placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, laid out each tax receipt in a neat row. I have paid property taxes on this entire parcel since 2004, I said slowly. If there has been a community easement since 1968, why has the county never adjusted the tax records? One board member behind her looked down at the table, flipping hurriedly through his papers. Sweat dotted his forehead. Linda tried to steady her voice. That does not prove anything. No, I said, but a certified county record does. I placed the 1968 copy on the table beside the tax receipts. The red seal stood out under the lights. Private agricultural access. Non-transferable. I read each word aloud. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. The room fell silent, quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the air conditioner in the corner. A man in the audience, probably around 55, stood up. Linda, are we certain about this? She turned to him, her gaze sharp. Of course we are. But her voice was no longer steady. I looked around the room. Many of the people there had spent their lives in the military, in construction, in factories. They understood one thing: official records cannot be replaced by a prettier printout. I am not seeking conflict, I said. I am protecting my property with what has been legally recorded. Linda tightened her grip on the documents in front of her. In her mind, calculations were likely racing. If the records I presented were genuine, then what exactly was her map? A misunderstanding, or something more creative than it should have been? The meeting ended in a mild chaos. No applause, no cheering, just eyes that had begun to shift with doubt. When I stepped outside, it was already dark. Streetlights cast long shadows across the freshly paved roads of Cedar Ridge. I did not feel victorious, only certain. They had misjudged me. They thought I was just an old man living alone on a hill. They did not know I understood the system from the inside. I knew how a record is officially filed. I knew what happens when an unrecorded document is used to apply legal pressure. I opened my truck door and set the briefcase on the passenger seat. Up on the hill, my log cabin rested in quiet darkness. This was no longer about a road that saved 8 minutes. It was about who had the right to rewrite the history of a piece of land. And I had no intention of letting anyone do that, with fresh ink and empty confidence. The man in the reflective jacket stepped out of the county pickup truck right in the middle of my dirt road. He drove a survey stake into the gravel, then looked straight towards Cedar Ridge as if drawing an invisible line. The rumor spread faster than I expected. Just 2 days after that chaotic meeting, I filed a formal request for an official boundary review with the county land office. Not because I doubted my records, but because I wanted everything measured again in broad daylight, in front of both sides. When the truck-marked county surveyor pulled up to my gate, I knew the game had moved to another level. Linda arrived 10 minutes later. Sunglasses covered half her face, but I could still see the tension in every step she took. 2 board members came with her, speaking quietly to each other. The surveyor, Mr. Hayes, a man in his early 60s, shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Caldwell, I reviewed the documents you submitted." His voice was calm. "Professional." Linda stepped in. "We also have documentation." Mr. Hayes nodded politely. "I will measure according to the records officially filed with the county." Each word landed heavy as stone. He began stretching the measuring tape, setting up his positioning equipment, calling out coordinates. I stood a few steps away, not interfering, just observing. The feeling was familiar, like returning to the days when I supervised bridge construction over a river. A light wind moved through the pine trees. The dirt road lay silent beneath our feet, as if waiting for a verdict. Linda crossed her arms, trying to maintain composure. In her mind, she likely still believed this was only a technical misunderstanding, that in the end, the road would be confirmed as community access. Mr. Hayes read out a string of coordinates, then checked the county system map. He walked forward several steps and drove another stake into the ground. "The official boundary ends here," he said, pointing to the edge of the dirt road. "The remaining portion lies entirely within Mr. Caldwell's parcel." The air thickened. One board member swallowed hard. Linda removed her sunglasses and stared at the survey stake as if she could change its position by force of will. "And the easement?" she asked. Mr. Hayes flipped through the file in his hands. "There is no recorded community easement here. There is a note from 1968 referencing private agricultural access, non-transferable. Exact words." I said nothing. I did not need to. Linda turned to me. This time, her eyes held no pride. They carried a mix of anger and fear. "Did you plan this from the beginning?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I looked at her calmly. "I simply read the records." Mr. Hayes continued taking a few additional measurements to complete his report. Each stake he drove into the ground felt like a hammer strike securing the truth into place. When he finished, he turned to me. "I will file the official report with the county this week. If disputes continue, the county will proceed according to regulations." Linda took a deep breath. In her eyes, for the first time, I saw a real question forming. She had believed in her map, or at least she believed no one would be patient enough to verify it. The greatest mistake of those who are overly confident is not that they lie. It is that they assume no one else is knowledgeable enough to detect it. As people began to leave, one of the 2 board members slowed near me. He spoke in a near whisper, almost apologetic. "We just thought the road would be convenient for the residents." "I understand," I replied. "But convenience does not replace ownership." He nodded, his gaze lowered. The county truck rolled away, Gravel dust rose and then slowly settled. Linda remained standing alone for a few seconds longer. I could see the calculations running through her mind. Perhaps she was weighing her next move. A threat, a lawsuit, or a retreat. I turned and walked back toward my house, leaving the road behind me. I did not put up another sign. I did not lock the gate. Not yet. I simply let the camera continue recording everything. Because now, if they continued using this road, despite the official survey report, it would no longer be a misunderstanding. It would be a deliberate violation. And when an action becomes deliberate, the law no longer treats it lightly. They once thought I was just a lonely old man on a hill. Today, they saw me standing beside the county surveyor, speaking the same language of coordinates and recorded filings. Not emotion, the system. And in a battle with an HOA, the system is what makes even the most confident people start losing sleep. The cease and desist letter was taped to my gate with red tape, like a declaration of war posted in broad daylight. They were no longer talking inside meeting rooms. They chose public intimidation. I read it under the afternoon sun. The tone was harsh, claiming that I was intentionally obstructing the lawful rights of the community and demanding that I cease all actions that were threatening HOA residents. Threatening. I looked around. The dirt road lay still. No barricades, no barbed wire, not a single raised voice. The only thing that had changed was the official county survey report filed that morning, and that had made someone nervous. That evening, I received another email from Linda, sent to all Cedar Ridge residents. It was forwarded to me by someone in the neighborhood. She attached a new map, this time with the words community easement confirmed by board review printed across it. Not the county. Board review. I sat quietly in my study. The desk lamp cast light across the wooden surface worn by years of use. I reopened the official survey report and read every line again. The boundary was clear. No easement. So why did she continue? The answer came quickly. Not because she believed she was right, but because she could not admit she was wrong. I opened my computer and assembled a clean, organized file. The certified copy from 1968. The latest survey report. 20 years of tax receipts. Photographs of the HOA laminated map with the post-1992 code marking. I did not send it to Linda. I sent it by certified mail to every board member. Each envelope required an individual signature. No accusations, no threats, just records. The next morning, I installed a small sign beside the gate. Private property, access without permission may be subject to civil action. I did not lock the gate. I waited. 2 days passed. The number of vehicles using the road dropped sharply. Some residents began taking the highway route again. The rumor had shifted direction. No longer about a stubborn old man blocking a shared road. Now it was about the board's map. On Thursday afternoon, one of the board members, Mr. Marshall, knocked on my door. He was not wearing an HOA polo shirt, no badge. "Linda says you are deliberately escalating this," he began, his voice tired. "I am not escalating anything," I replied. "I am simply not stepping back." He sat down on the porch chair. Wind moved through the pine trees, carrying the scent of resin and damp earth. He looked down the road. "That map. I have never seen the original filing," he said quietly. I said nothing. I simply placed the certified county copy in front of him. He read slowly. His lips pressed tight. "I served in the military for 20 years, he said after a moment. "I do not like being put in a position to sign off on something that is not correct." I looked at him. "Then do not sign." He looked up. His expression changed. No longer defensive, thoughtful. When he left, I knew something had shifted. Not out there. Inside their board. That night, I received an email from Linda. Short, cold. "You are trying to divide the board." I read it and turned off the screen. I am not dividing anyone. The truth does that on its own. Night settled slowly. I sat in my study listening to the wind brush against the window. The camera by the gate recorded a vehicle stopping, then turning around without entering. They were beginning to hesitate. Linda might still believe that confidence and pressure would make me retreat. But she did not know I had worked on projects where a single wrong signature could cause an entire bridge to collapse. I understand the weight of a signature, and I understand the fear that comes when you realize you have signed something that does not exist in the official record. This fight was no longer between me and the HOA. It was between Linda and her own board. I did not need to attack. I only needed to stand still, hold the records in my hands, and let silence do the rest. Because when truth begins to slip into private conversations, it is not loud, but it makes those who once felt certain begin to question whether they are standing on solid ground or on a map printed in too much haste. The gray vehicle from the county prosecutor's office pulled up in front of the Cedar Ridge entrance at 9 in the morning. No sirens, no noise, just a large envelope delivered by hand. And from that moment on, the game was over. I was not there when they received the official notice, but I knew exactly what was inside because 2 weeks earlier, I had personally submitted the entire file to the county attorney's office. Not to sue, to report. I included the laminated map Linda had presented at the meeting. I included the official survey report, the certified copy from 1968, and enlarged images of the code marking that only appeared after 1992. I wrote no accusations. I simply asked one question. Was this document officially recorded? That morning, Mr. Marshall called me. His voice was low and urgent. They say the map the board used does not exist in the county system. I remained silent. And if it was used to threaten legal action, that is a violation. I looked out at the dirt road. Sunlight reflected off the gravel, as if there had never been any conflict at all. What will the county do? I asked. They issued an official citation, requiring the board to withdraw its claims and cease using any unrecorded documentation. Citation. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not out of satisfaction, because I understood what that meant for Linda. That same afternoon, an emergency meeting was held in the community center. No more map projected on a large screen. No more confident voice speaking about history and community rights. Only tense faces. Linda stood at the front, but this time her shoulders were no longer straight. In her hand was the county citation. I was told she tried to explain it as a technical misunderstanding, but the word misunderstanding cannot erase the county prosecutor's seal. A resident stood up. He had once trusted the board completely. Did we threaten to sue a man based on a document that does not exist? The room fell into a heavy silence. Linda tried to remain composed. We acted in the best interest of the community. Another voice spoke. The best interest of the community does not include creating new records. I was not there. I sat on my porch listening to the wind move through the pine trees. But I could picture every expression in that room. The doubt, the disappointment, the slow collapse of trust. By the end of the meeting, 2 board members resigned on the spot. Mr. Marshall was one of them. He stated clearly that he could not continue signing any document when transparency was in question. Linda did not resign that day, but I heard that when she walked out of the meeting, no one followed her. The next morning, my dirt road was completely empty. Not a single vehicle passed through. The camera recorded nothing but wind and shifting tree shadows across the gravel. I stepped out to the gate and looked at the survey stake still driven deep into the ground. It was small, yet it carried the weight of an entire legal system behind it. They once thought I was just an old man living alone on a hill. They did not know I understood how the county works, how records function, how legal responsibility operates. I did not need to shout. I did not need to threaten. I only needed to ask the right question in the right place. And the system answered on its own. That afternoon, I received an official letter from the board. No more harsh tone. No more threats. Just a notice stating that Cedar Ridge HOA would temporarily suspend all claims regarding access to the Western Road pending completion of an internal review. I set the letter down on the table. This fight was not entirely over, but the balance had shifted. Not because I was stronger than they were, but because I never stepped off solid ground. In confrontations between surface confidence and official records, the winner is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is the one who knows where the truth is kept. And sometimes, A single county citation is enough to make an entire board reconsider the map they once believed was untouchable. Linda resigned on a windless morning. No dramatic email announcement, no farewell speech, just a short line posted on the internal bulletin board of Cedar Ridge. Effective immediately. I heard the news from Mr. Marshall. His voice over the phone was no longer as tense as before. She couldn't withstand the pressure from the residents, he said, and the county is still reviewing further. I stood by the window of my office, looking down at the dirt road stretching under the sunlight. Not a single fresh tire track had marked the gravel for days. The quiet had returned, without noise, without celebration. Just the emptiness after a storm. I was not happy. I did not feel vindicated either. I simply felt a sense of closure. On the evening Linda stepped down, a residents' meeting was held to elect an interim president. This time, no one talked about the easement. No one mentioned community access. The only topics were transparency and accountability. A man stood up and said plainly, "We trusted a map without verifying it." An older woman shook her head. "We almost sued a man just to shorten an 8-minute drive. 8 minutes. When I heard those words repeated to me, I felt something deep inside. Not pride, confirmation. This fight had never been about the road. It was about who had the right to define the truth. 2 days later, I received an envelope from the new board. No oversized logo, no threatening tone. Inside was a formal letter of apology. They acknowledged that the document previously used had not been fully verified according to county records. They committed to no longer pursuing access rights. I read the letter once, then folded it. I stepped outside, carrying an iron gate I had bought the week before but had not installed. Not because I wanted to build a barricade, but because I wanted clarity of boundaries. I set the gate at the entrance of the dirt path. I did not lock it. I simply closed it. A small sign hung beside it reading, "Private property respect boundaries." No threat, just a reminder. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat on the porch. Sunlight filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the ground. No cars passed by. No watchful eyes lingered. Only birds and wind. I remembered the first day Linda stood in the middle of the road, holding up that laminated map. Her eyes had been certain then, almost pitying me. In her eyes, I was just an old man living on the edge of a new development. She did not know I had spent a lifetime working with land records, with state regulations, with disputes capable of reshaping projects worth millions of dollars. She did not know I understood the system far better than many people in that HOA meeting room. And most importantly, she did not know that I was not afraid to use that system when necessary. The dirt road lay silent before me, as if it had never been the center of a confrontation. But I knew it had taught a lesson. Not to me. To all of Cedar Ridge. True power does not lie in the position of president or in the HOA seal. It lies in whether you stand on legal ground. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the mild bitterness on the tip of my tongue. The wind moved through, and the iron gate let out a faint sound, a reminder that the boundary had been set. Not with shouting, not with threats, with records. And sometimes, in communities that seem to be built of concrete and regulations, what truly keeps everything standing is something far simpler: the truth. 6 months later, I received an invitation. Not a court summons, not a warning letter. It was a polite invitation from the new president of Cedar Ridge. They wanted me to attend the community meeting as a guest of honor. I looked at the card resting on my kitchen table and let out a quiet laugh. Once, they wanted me off my own road. Now, they wanted me in the front row. I arrived on a cool autumn afternoon. The community center looked the same, but the atmosphere had changed. No tension, no suspicious stares. The new president, a man in his early 50s, shook my hand with both of his. "We have reviewed all the community records," he said, "and we are updating our verification procedures before making any legal claims." I nodded. There was no need for congratulations. Inside the room, I recognized several faces who had remained silent during the earlier meeting. Some gave me a slight nod as I walked past. Others avoided eye contact, perhaps because they had once believed the wrong story. I did not blame them. When trust is handed to the loudest person in the room, it often follows volume instead of evidence. The new president invited me to say a few words. I stood before the same room that had once echoed with accusations, now quiet and waiting. I did not speak about Linda. I did not speak about mistakes. I spoke about records. I spent more than 30 years working with land and infrastructure. I began. One thing I learned is that paperwork is never angry. It is never rushed. It simply records the truth at that moment. The room remained still. If we want to live in a strong community, we must respect boundaries and procedures, not because the law is cold, but because it is how we protect each other from mistakes. I looked around slowly. Power is not about how beautifully you can print a map. It is about whether you can prove where it has been recorded. A few people nodded softly. I did not speak long. I did not need to. As I stepped away from the podium, I saw something new in many of their eyes. Respect. Not because I had won, but because I had not answered anger with anger. On the drive home, I passed the old turn that led up to my dirt road. The iron gate was still there, unlocked, simply closed. The sunset spread gold across the gravel. For 6 months, not a single car had deliberately crossed it. The boundary had been understood. I parked, stepped out, and stood there for a moment. The evening wind moved through the pine trees, carrying the familiar scent of sap. The wooden house on the hill remained, steady as the day I moved in. When Linda stood in the middle of the road, she believed I was powerless, an old man living alone. What she did not see was that I had once sat at tables where a single wrong decision could send an entire bridge collapsing into a river. I understood the value of patience. I understood how systems function, and I knew when to let the system work on my behalf. This confrontation did not change the road. It changed the way a community looks at records, and perhaps the way they look at the man on the hill. I returned to the porch and sat down in the old wooden chair, watching the last light of the day fade. If you have ever lived under an HOA, if you have ever seen confidence overpower the truth, you understand that feeling. Do not be afraid of being underestimated. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who knows exactly where the records are kept. If this story reminds you of a time you had to stand up and protect your boundaries, share in the comments which state you are watching from. Press like if you believe the truth does not need to shout to win. And subscribe to Karen Karma Stories so we can continue telling stories where old paperwork defeats new arrogance. Because sometimes, justice does not arrive with noise. It arrives with a red seal stamped on the right page in the right year.